You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Dell Technologies, a unique family of businesses that provides the essential infrastructure for organizations to build their digital future, transform IT, and protect their most important asset, information. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Keri Roberts, and my guest today is Brad Montgomery, a Federal DPS Presales Director at Dell. Welcome, Brad. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Keri. Thanks for having me today.
So we are chatting about cyber recovery today and how to protect against ransomware. And since the coronavirus began, there's actually been a 4,000% increase in the number of cyber attacks. Can you share with us some of the current challenges and reasons for this increase?
Absolutely. So cyber threats in general have shifted in focus recently, and they've moved more towards data destruction instead of just the usual vandalism and theft that we typically associate with ransomware. And what this has done is that this has vaulted cybersecurity and cyber recovery to really the forefront of priorities for agencies, C-level executives, and for security officers. So there's a couple factors that we can talk about that we can attribute to these increase in attacks that you mentioned. So, the first thing is that there's been a shift to the edge. There's a shift in the workforce to remote, as we've noticed as part of the COVID-19 crisis. And this has really put a strain on IT departments, and it's really exposed security gaps on supporting all these remote workers. And as a result, ransomware operators, bad actors, have shifted their focus towards these remote workers. And again, you mentioned the 4,000% increase in attacks. A large portion of that is a result of these remote workforce and the increase in phishing attempts and increased ransomware demands. We're also seeing a increased sophistication in the tools that the bad actors are using, and also state-sponsored attacks. And this is certainly something that we need to be concerned about from a federal government perspective. And it helps to understand the various attack vectors and the various threats that are out there, more so than just malware and ransomware. There's a lot of different motivations out there for organizations that are trying to steal or disrupt an organization or a nation state. So you have your usual criminals who use ransomware to just do theft or to extort for financial gain. You've got your insider threats, right? And these are key individuals within your organization that have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, to access critical applications. Of course, when we talk about the federal government and large corporations, we have to be worried about espionage. We always worry about hacktivism and terrorism. And of course, cyber warfare as part of a larger, state-sponsored campaign against a various country. And then finally, there's some misconceptions out there about like what is really required to safeguard an agency against the various cyber attacks that an organization faces. Organizations use data encryption. They might use tape backups. They might use disaster recovery to protect their data or think that they have their data safeguarded. But all of these methodologies are limited in protecting against all the threats that cyber attacks represent. Again, the ransomware, the malware, insider threats, nation state developed cyber weapons. All these capabilities have holes in them. And that's really why we want to educate our audience about a true cyber recovery solution. So, we look for a couple key things. We want to make sure that you have a recovery plan with a critical rebuild list. And we want to make sure that a air-gapped cyber vault is used to store critical data.
You mentioned, which we've heard a lot in this show, that there's been a lot of cyber attacks because of remote workers. Can you share with us maybe some that you've seen or ones that remote workers should be looking out for that they may not be aware of?
So, one of the biggest one of the biggest challenges that we see with the remote workforce is the increase in the phishing attacks. And one of the biggest threats that we oftentimes try to solve with a cyber recovery solution is the impact of insider threats. And an insider threat, it's not always the disgruntled employee that gets fired and wants to do some damage on the last day. It could be an employee who's been compromised by a hostile nation state through blackmail, but more likely, it's a bad actor who uses a phishing attack to steal credentials of a remote worker or a remote worker with admin privileges. And once a bad actor has those access, those remote privileges, then they can really start laying landmines for future attacks or conduct an attack just based on those credentials that he or she owns. So that's probably one of the biggest threats that we are seeing with the move towards the remote workforce.
Now, you were mentioning just a few moments ago, there are actually 3 things that you suggest companies need at this time. They need to, number 1, guard against insider attacks. Number 2, have a recovery plan. And then number 3, have an air gap solution. Can you break these down just a little bit more into what they mean and how you make some of these solutions happen?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So on the insider attacks, we hit on that one already. And honestly, that's probably the number one thing that organizations need to look out for. And when we talk about, the criticality of having a recovery plan or a critical rebuild list, first of all, let me explain what that means. Critical rebuild data, that refers to the configuration data for your infrastructure, such as your LUN mappings for your storage area network, maybe your DNS settings, your Active Directory settings, things like that. These are all very important configuration details that need to be secured and stored in a cyber vault type solution. Let me give you an interesting case study. So one of the biggest attacks that happened recently was against the shipping giant Maersk. They were a victim of the NotPetya, a ransomware attack, and this was devastating to them. It took down 50,000 of their endpoints, their remote servers. It took down thousands of applications and servers across their 600 sites and across 130 countries. I think based on the articles that I saw about this, the financial losses were measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, as devastating as that was, the best part of the story is how they're able to recover. The thing that allowed Maersk to actually start their rebuild was the fact that they had some of their configuration data, like Active Directory, replicated at a remote data center. Now, very, very lucky for Maersk, this data center had become disconnected from the overall network just at the same time that the attack was happening. So therefore, they had this critical data in this remote data center that was still able to be used to help rebuild their operations. Now, even with this data, it still took Maersk over almost 2 weeks to basically rebuild their entire infrastructure from the ground up. But it really emphasizes the importance of having this critical rebuild data. So if you are the victim of a cyber attack and your infrastructure is destroyed, you can quickly implement this rebuild list and get your infrastructure operational again. And then on the last thing, on the air gap, I want to make sure that everyone understands what we talk about when we talk about an air gap solution. This refers to a network isolated and a physically separate environment from your production systems. And this automated air gap capability, that's a key component of Dell's cyber recovery solution. And now the air gap isn't a new idea. It's been around for some time, and it's been implemented as a best practice for separating networks and for remediating against cyber attacks. There's a couple key agencies that recommend the air gap solution. FBI, for example, their best practice is, number 1, you got to back up your data. But number 2, you need to ensure that the backups are separate from the production environment and separate from the network that they're being backed up. So, it has to be physically stored in an offline environment. And, if the organization is ever hit from ransomware, obviously backups are going to be key to recovering quickly. And then if you start looking at some of the financial institutions out there, they all agree that an air-gapped data backup architecture really limits your exposure to a cyber attack. And it gives you that ability to restore the data from the point before the cyber attack actually took place. So We understand that an air gap solution is critical to getting back on your feet after a devastating cyber attack. Dell's cyber recovery solution seeks to address all the needs of a cyber vault solution. We provide an automated vaulted air gap solution. We can use our best-of-breed technology to add efficiency to the solution. A key point, we support third-party backup applications. So it doesn't matter if a customer, if an agency has a heterogeneous environment with multiple backup applications, cyber recovery is still a good solution for them. All of our vaulted data, it's immutable and it's untraceable. And we do provide full context indexing for analysis and to help trace the source of a cyber attack.
Now, when it comes to recovery plans, how often should an organization be updating that?
That's a great question. So, anytime there's a significant change within the environment, and as we know from a tech refresh schedule, new systems are always being brought online, new virtual machines, new virtualization, new movements to the cloud. So, there is no set in stone best practice, but it is something that should be scheduled on perhaps a weekly or a monthly basis to ensure that the most up-to-date information is moved from your production environment into the vault. Obviously, the main purpose of cyber recovery is to be able to recover in the event of a disaster. And so having a regular cadence of moving data into the vault ensures that if a recovery is needed, then the most up-to-date configuration prior to the attack is able to be restored into the environment.
Now, for organizations, let's say worst case scenario, they really don't have an updated recovery plan. They're not doing this air gap solution. They really aren't as prepared. Maybe they haven't really looked at things in years. And let's say they get attacked in a really big way. Is there anything that an organization can do? Obviously, they learn their lesson. They have to do things, better the next time. But is there anything that they can do in those situations?
Yeah, so great question there. Most organizations have some kind of backup strategy already. They're running backups. They're doing disaster recovery, perhaps. They're replicating their data. But one of the reasons that we want to emphasize the importance of cyber recovery today is to help customers and agencies understand that the protection steps that they're making today aren't sufficient in a worst case scenario. So, for example, most agencies have a backup solution, but again, ransomware has become increasingly sophisticated. And one of the first things that a bad actor who's using ransomware tools will do is target the backup environment. And we've seen this multiple times. City of Atlanta, one example, City of Baltimore, another example, where the first thing that was done was to attack the backup infrastructure. And once the backup infrastructure is gone or corrupted, that it leaves no protection for the production environment. And honestly, any backup solution that's using a unprotected network share over CIFS or NFS is susceptible to this type of attack. So, there's that false sense of security that might exist for organizations that are using that. And same for disaster recovery. Sometimes there's this sense of security that if you have a offsite DR copy, then you're going to be safe. And that does protect against, many different types of situations, but it doesn't protect against the insider threats. It doesn't protect against malware that's been replicated from the production sites to the DR site. So there's still holes in each of these solutions. And this is really why we want to, again, educate, agencies and organizations that they need to be looking at a holistic solution to protect against all types of bad actors and cyber threats that are out there.
Yeah, I think those are some really good points. Another thing you talk about that's important is supporting state and local agencies. What's happening in this space? Why is it important? Maybe can you share with us some examples of what you mean?
Yeah, so, first off, no one is immune to ransomware or cyber attacks. And, if you look across the news, you find, unfortunately, hundreds of examples of state and local and education agencies that have been attacked. And a lot of the reasons that I listed earlier for the motivations of bad actors is amplified with state and local and education. Just because, the budgets for data protection might not be as robust, they have, fewer protection tools. They have a lot of more endpoints that are susceptible to attacks. And then unfortunately with cyber attacks, you can be right 99% of the time, but at one time that they are able to get into your network, that's when destruction can happen. And that's why you really need to have a cyber recovery solution. So the two examples I gave, City of Atlanta, City of Baltimore, these are devastating. For Atlanta, I think the police department lost a third of all their applications that included criminal evidence and all dash cam activities. And I think the total cost for that was almost $20 million. City of Baltimore, that attack actually affected nearly every department inside the city's government. And that resulted in over 3 weeks of downtime. So imagine not having any government services for almost a month. And that was, again, a heavy financial burden that cost, almost $16 million in damages. And we can see that, over and over again, looking at, universities being attacked, school districts being attacked, and so on and so on. And that's why, it's important to mention that, there's lots of different protection methodologies out there. A lot of these organizations relied on tape backups, and tape, seems to check a lot of the boxes, right? Because it's offline, it's not on the network. It's if you lock it in a safe, it's secure. But then you got to really think about, like, what's my recovery path for that? If I'm a victim of a devastating cyber attack, how am I going to restore terabytes and terabytes of data from old tape drives? Are those tapes still viable, right? Do I still have the infrastructure to read those tapes? And most importantly, how do I provide any kind of analytics on that data? What happens if I restore all this tape and then I discover that I had malware that was backed up on these tapes? Then I got to start all over again. So the recovery path from tape is not good in the event that you're trying to get back on your feet, very, very quickly. A lot of these state and local agencies also had cyber recovery insurance. I mean, this is something that's become popular recently with the increase in ransomware. There are organizations that offer insurance to help you pay down the ransom if you're ever hit. But paying the ransom, as we've seen from FBI cases, is no guarantee that you're going to get your data back. I mean, the bad actors can take your Bitcoin and then just refuse to give you the de-encryption keys. And even worse, if they maintain malware within your environment and you're continually susceptible to future attacks. So again, lots of dangers out there. I mean, I think it's very important to review that there's holes in the various solutions that exist, and that's why it's very important to take a holistic look at what's required to protect your data against the worst case scenario.
And Dell offers, of course, a lot of ways to help with everything we're talking about. And they have a comprehensive management tool to help monitor the agency with reporting. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Absolutely. This is probably the most exciting thing. And let me give a real world example. Today, as consumers, we're used to having some basic protections built into, the applications that we use, right? So if you do any kind of online banking, the bank will send you an email or a text that says, hey, we discovered an unauthorized transaction, or is this you who tried to make this purchase in Eastern Europe? And of course, based on information, we can take action. And even I'll use Netflix accounts as an example, right? I mean, we get alerts that say someone tried to log on to your account in Malaysia. Was this you? And then, of course, we can take remediation steps against that. So that same kind of protection scheme needs to exist for your data as well. You need analytics to understand if there is anything in your data that is improper before you actually go to restore it. And this is what Dell's we call CyberSense solution provides. So CyberSense is a reporting engine and an analysis tool that uses a combination of full content-based analytics and machine learning to detect if an attack has occurred. And so, our analytics, are able to detect, the most common attack vectors, including entropy changes, known ransomware extensions. It can detect data corruption, deletion, and over 100 other statistics. And within CyberSense, the machine learning that we have, is able to determine if data corruption has already occurred. So this gives a organization the peace of mind. And within our reporting tools, as we analyze data sets before we recover them, we can say either if a data set is good or if a data set is suspicious. And if it is suspicious, what are the traits that flag it as that? And then we can take remediation access on it. And then, most importantly, if you are hit by a cyber attack, you want to take steps to ensure that you cannot be hit again. So post-attack, the CyberSense tools provide forensic capability to diagnose and recover. So again, this includes reports on files that were impacted so that they can be replaced with the last known good version of those files. It reports on the type of attack vector and includes analysis from event logs for the specific user accounts that were attacked as well. And so, in summary, all of these capability, gives the administrators, the end users, the tools that they need and the knowledge that they need to, number one, quickly to detect, if they are the recipient of a cyber attack, and number two, be able to recover quickly from those cyber attacks.
Which is great. It's wonderful that Dell is doing that, and you're providing so much information here today. When you think of technology as a whole, where do you see it going within the next year?
Yeah, so, great question. Couple key things that we are looking for as we, advance this technology. Now, one thing I do want to mention, Dell was the first to market with this solution, and right now the capabilities that we provide, certainly surpass other solutions that are on the market today. One important validation point is that we are the only solution out there that's been validated by the Sheltered Harbor Initiative, and this is an initiative that safeguards the financial data for banks and other financial institutions in the U.S. So we're very, very proud of that designation as being the only one who has met their very stringent requirements. So when I look, outward on where we're going to go with cyber recovery, there's a lot of key technologies that we're going to be able to leverage. So, number one is the cloud. We see a continued convergence of on-premise workload and cloud workloads, and that's no different for the cyber recovery solution. So we're certainly looking at the cloud as a capability that can augment our on-premise cyber vault capabilities, using the cloud as a data bunker, for example. Now, that said, there's still many considerations to look at. The cloud as a whole does come with some inherent security risks, but, we're working through those with some of the major public cloud vendors, and I think we'll be able to introduce some very compelling technology within the second half of this year. Next thing to mention is, one of the benefits of Dell is that we are a huge family of technologies. So you're going to see a lot more integration across the various capabilities that we have as Dell Technologies. So as an example, you're going to see integration with Dell SecureWorks. You may see integration with VMware's Carbon Black capabilities. And the idea behind this is to really put together a holistic solution that can address all aspects of the NIST framework. So that's very exciting for us. And then the last thing is we want to make it easy for our customers. And this is something that we have today in tandem with our partners. So, when you look at what the cyber recovery solution consists of, you've got deduplication storage, you've got a compute environment, you've got a recovery sandbox, you've got your CyberSense analysis servers, you've got networking. And one, very, very exciting thing that we're doing with our partners is that we're creating fully, turnkey pre-rack solutions in small, medium, large designs that customers can quickly deploy into their infrastructure, as well as provide the necessary consulting services to help customers create those critical rebuild lists and determine what data is appropriate to go into the cyber vault. It's not going to be all your data. We're not trying to replicate your backup environment. It's going to be the crown jewels of your environment that your organization can't live without. So, thanks to the work that we're doing with our partners, as well as the technology that we have within Dell, we're really providing a easy way for customers to better secure their data.
Now, if people have questions about anything we talked about cyber recovery, they want to connect with you or learn more, where is the best place to do that?
Yeah, so Keri, all of the information that I've talked about today can be found on the Dell Technologies website. So what I'd recommend is just go into a browser and type Dell Cyber Recovery, and that will take you to our portal with all the information about the cyber recovery solution, case studies, customer success stories, and other white papers that'll help to better understand the capabilities that we offer with cyber recovery. I also recommend that you work with our partners at Ingram Micro. So Glenn Jeffries at glenn.jeffries@ingrammicro.com and Christopher Martin at christopher.martin at ingrammicro.com are great resources to lean on to get more information about the solution.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight today, Brad. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me today. It was a lot of fun.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter at Ingram TechSol with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Keri Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Dell Technologies. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton. To not miss an episode, subscribe today to your favorite podcast platform.